Israel's national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, got in trouble this week because he said that Jewish lives matter. Our liberal left opposes a commission of inquiry into the illegal use of spyware devices used or supposed to be used for terrorists against Israeli civilians. And Iran is entering full force into the Palestinian arena. That and much more on my news analysis coming up. Hey, welcome to my weekly news analysis. I'm Caroline Glick, and look, you want to see? We're going to be unloading our new graphics for this show next week. But here, in the meantime, I got a new mug. It's called merch. Apparently, that's what my kids say. Anyway, yeah, Caroline Glick mug, pretty cool. Anyway, now that I bragged a little bit about how we're going to be upgrading the Caroline Glick Show and this news analysis next week, let's just get into the news analysis for this week. And by the way, it's great to be back in Jerusalem at the JNS studio. So last week, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who everybody's supposed to hate because he's supposed to be a fascist, said something that on surface doesn't seem to be a problem at all. He said that the lives of Jews traveling on the roads of Judea and Samaria are more important than the right of the Palestinians to travel freely on the roads. And why did he say that? He said that because we had just seen the murder of kindergarten teacher, a 40-year-old named Batsheva Nagari, who was murdered in a shower of bullets as she and another Israeli and her 6-year-old daughter were driving in the South Hebron Hills on their way to their community, Beit Fagai, by Palestinian terrorists. And the reason that the Palestinian terrorists were able to approach them with such ease was because there were no roadblocks on the road. And so you have free travel of the Palestinians are able to easily approach any Jew driving down the roads in Judea and Samaria with absolutely no difficulty. And we've had 34 Israeli Jews murdered over the past year, many of them on the roads in Judea and Samaria. 3 of those were my neighbors in Efrat. Incidentally, Batsheva Nagari is also a native of Efrat, and she was a kindergarten teacher in one of the neighborhoods in our community. And over Passover, of course, we had the murder of Lucy D. and her daughters Maya and Rena in the Jordan Valley. And here, too, the reason that the terrorists were able to approach them with such ease and murder them in an ambush and a rain of bullets, just like what happened to Batsheva Nagari last week, is because there were no roadblocks on the road. And why aren't there any roadblocks? Because every time that Israel puts in roadblocks to check outside of his Palestinian towns and villages for terrorists, when the IDF puts up these roadblocks, the Americans go nuts, along with the UN that condemns Israel, and, thousands of EU supportive NGOs and also the European Union itself and its member states. They all come down and say that Israel's an apartheid state because it's putting up roadblocks and making it hard for Palestinians to travel freely in Judea and Samaria. And every time that these roadblocks are brought down, Jews are dying. So, why are there roadblocks? There are roadblocks to prevent Jews from being killed, not in order to persecute Palestinians in any way. One of the many unreported facts is that Israeli Jews also wait in roadblocks every single time that we travel between sovereign Israel and Judea and Samaria. You have to go through roadblocks. Every time that I, for instance, drive to Modi'in, which is where Channel 14, where I work as a commentator, is from where I live. So I have to go through 1, 2, 3 roadblocks because of the roads that you drive on. It's just the way it is. And is it good? Is it bad? It's a way of saving lives. It's a way of protecting our lives. It's a way of protecting the lives of people who live throughout the country. And under pressure from the international community, so-called, all of these anti-Israel activists in the State Department in Brussels, in the international left that operate in this global community of anti-Israel NGOs that is just $1 billion business a year. Every single time that we try to protect Jewish lives in Judea and Samaria, we have it rammed into us that we're an apartheid state because we're putting up these roadblocks. And here last week, again, we had this clear case of a woman being murdered in front of her 6-year-old daughter in a rain of bullets in a car driving home right? Because she's Jewish. That's the only reason that she was targeted. All three of them were targeted. The driver is in critical condition, or he's critically wounded. I hope that he's improved since then. And the little girl watching her mother, a kindergarten teacher, get murdered. Why? Because they're Jews. By who? By Palestinian Arabs who were shooting at them because they were Jewish. And so what we're told is that Jewish lives don't matter. Out comes Itamar Ben-Gvir and says on an Israeli television interview, he says, he started off a little bit, maybe you could say his phrasing was wrong, because his first sentence was, our freedom of movement or our right to life is more sacred than theirs. Or he actually will play it for you.
הזכות שלי, של אשתי, של הילדים שלי, להסתובב בכבישי יהודה ושומרון, יותר חשוב מזכות התנועה של הערבים. סליחה מוחמד, אבל זו המציאות, זו האמת, זכות החיים שלי קודמת לזכות התנועה.
So you see what he did. He had two sentences. The first seems to say that our freedom of movement is more important than theirs, but then he explained that what he's talking about is his right to life. Under any other circumstances, if it had been a French minister of police saying that, or an American, or anybody in any country in the world saying that, and maybe you should say, well, you should have said it in the first sentence, nobody would have ever said that they were racist. Everybody would have understood immediately what they were talking about. But because Itamar Ben-Gvir said it, Israel is immediately castigated by the State Department, by all of the right-thinking people in the world, as an apartheid state, as a racist state, as a state that is immoral, that has no right to exist. This is pure and simple anti-Semitism. Jewish lives do matter, and they are more sacred than the inconvenience of Palestinian motorists on the street who are cultivating a culture of death and murder of Jews. And there's absolutely no reason that anybody should suffer. Now, why did this all happen? It was in Israeli media. It was a Hebrew interview. What happened? So what happened was, you had a left-wing activist in Israel who put out this claim on Twitter that Itamar Ben-Gvir, he edited out the second sentence that Ben-Gvir said in order to make it look like Ben-Gvir was saying that was saying something racist. And he puts it out, and of course, anytime that somebody puts something out speaking disparagingly of Ben-Gvir or any other member of this government, the Israeli left immediately pounces on it. So Channel 12, I think, is a station that he gave the interview to. They pounced on it along with Nadav Eyal from Yediot Ahronot and all of these other Israeli journalists. And then it goes into the media bloodstream through them internationally, so that it was the Israeli media who actually perpetrated this slander against Israel's national security minister and through him of the Israeli government and of the state of Israel. And why did they do that? Well, since I wouldn't say it's actually only been since, but certainly since the Netanyahu government was sworn in, the Israeli left has become this charter member of the international BDS organization or movement. Why did they do this? Why are they calling for a boycott and sanctioning and divestiture from Israel? And all of them are. I mean, this is the centerpiece of the so-called protest movement, which is really just an insurrection against the government of Israel and the Israeli regime of democracy where majority rules. They're saying, take your investments out of Israel. We're going to pull our high-tech firms out of Israel. They've said it openly. We've spoken about this in previous weeks. They're calling, Moshe Radman called, Kobe Rifter called, who are the top people in this insurrection, are calling for the economy of Israel to be just destroyed. They were really upset when Israel's credit rating wasn't lowered 2 weeks ago by Fitch's, because they've been lobbying Moody's and Fitch's and all of these other ratings groups to lower Israel's credit rating, because they are now leading the BDS movement against Israel. So they're against the economy. They're saying that Israel's an apartheid state. This Holocaust studies professor at Hebrew University actually attacked Felix Klein, the German anti-Semitism commissioner who fights anti-Semitism, who said that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. And a professor of Holocaust studies at Hebrew University attacked him in the German press and said, no, actually, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Israel is a racist state. That's not a statement of anti-Semitism. That's just a description of reality. Or Israel is an apartheid state. This is crazy stuff, but this is what's happening now in Israel. These are Israeli elite were making these claims internationally against Israel, and they're running this this BDS group. I mean, we talked about it 2 weeks ago in our news analysis when I was talking about the blood libel that they put out about the terrorist attack, the attempted lynching of Jews outside of the community of Ost Zion in the Benjamin region, outside of the Palestinian village of Boycott, where they said that an Israeli who had come along with his friends to save a shepherd from a lynch mob 40 minutes before Shabbat and was forced to shoot in the air to try to push back this Palestinian mob that was rioting and throwing explosive firecrackers and beating them with rods and with rocks, so that they called him a terrorist, while this guy was literally in critical condition in the ICU at Shaare Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem with cerebral bleeding in his brain because he had just been hit by a massive rock just as he shot off, and a Palestinian was allegedly killed by his bullet, although we don't know because the Palestinian Authority won't release its autopsy report. So we don't actually know the cause of death of the Palestinian who was killed. But nobody checked any of the Palestinian claims. The Israeli media during Shabbat, when none of the Jews involved in what had happened on Friday evening had an opportunity to talk, because they all keep Shabbat, they all observe Shabbat, and they don't watch the news, and they don't talk on their telephones on Shabbat. So they were the ones who, again, put out this slander, this blood libel against Israel, against Israelis in Judea and Samaria, saying that Israeli terrorists entered the village of Burqa and started shooting up the place, and that a Palestinian was killed. And they never said anything about a lynch mob. They never said anything about the attempted murder of the shepherd. They never said anything about the fact that the Jew that's being accused of murdering the Palestinian who allegedly died from an Israeli bullet was actually himself in the ICU and had almost died. None of this had been reported because the Israeli media is busy demonizing the government. And, you see this in the English media, the English language Israeli media as well. You have the Times of Israel is like joined at the hip with Haaretz, which is, of course, the anti-Zionist Hebrew language newspaper in Israel that also publishes an Israel edition. So the Times of Israel has these people who used to be seen as centrists, Yossi Klein, Levi, Mati Friedman, Danny Gordis, and they have officially joined the revolution against Israeli democracy, right? They claim that liberal Israel is going to die because of the government, and therefore they're calling for American Jews not to normalize the Israeli government. I mean, this is serious stuff. These people are people who have positions, among the American Jewish community. They've made their money speaking to Jewish federations and Reform and conservative synagogues and such. And here they are, telling all of the people who've been reading them for decades that Israel should not be accepted because the Israeli people, the majority of the Israelis who voted for the Netanyahu government, are completely unacceptable and should be shunned. And they should be shunned by American Jews boycotting Netanyahu, refusing to meet with him, refusing to meet with the government ministers because they mustn't normalize the government. So this is all part of like this BDS movement where, for years, and it's stunning, right? Because for years, for decades, really, right, all of us have been fighting for equal rights for Israelis, for the end to the double standard against Israel, the singular standard that Israel is held to by the so-called international community, which is really just an international lynch mob against the Jewish state, that you can't judge us by a singular standard, that you can't say that everybody is allowed to do all of these things and Israel is allowed to do none of these things. And if Israel defends itself in any way, shape, or form, then it's guilty of war crimes and it's an apartheid state and all the rest of this nonsense. But now you have all of these people who were supposedly defending Israel all of these years joining the lynch mob and holding Israel to a singular standard that nobody can abide by, because they essentially are saying that we don't have a right to choose our own governments, that democracy only works when they're in charge. And that brings us to the issue of the spyware, which I promised was the second subject that I was going to talk about today. And so I'm going to do that right now. On Sunday, the government met, and after several weeks of discussion, they passed a decision forming a commission of inquiry, a governmental commission of inquiry to be chaired by former deputy magistrate court judge, vice president judge named Drury, who's one of the most celebrated judges in the Jerusalem Magistrates Court, and is a magistrate, is the second one, district court. And so Judge Drury is going to be chairing this governmental commission of inquiry that's going to investigate the abuse of spyware that was invented, that was created, that was constituted as spyware in counter-terrorist operations, and it was used. It was weaponized against Israeli civilians who are innocent in police investigations, and it was done so illegally. There's no basis in Israeli law for using these kinds of counter-terrorist tools against Israeli civilians. We've talked about this a lot in the context of Netanyahu's trial, because the police investigators in the investigations against Netanyahu just used a wholesale use of this spyware device called Pegasus against Netanyahu's advisors, apparently against his children and his wife, with no legal oversight, with no legal authority to do so. And they were granted the right to do this illegally, essentially, by the Attorney General then, Avichai Mandelblit, and his deputy, this woman named Amita Merari. And so all of this came to light in an investigative report published by a reporter named Tomer Ganon in the Kalkalis newspaper last year. And he got in all kinds of trouble from the left for publishing this. I mean, first they were very excited and they heralded his story. And then the second day, the second installment of the story was explaining that it was used against Netanyahu's advisors and relatives. And then they suddenly hated him and they burned him in effigy and all the rest of it, because how dare he publish something that actually undermined the Attorney General and the police efforts to frame Netanyahu. So anyway, it worked out. The Knesset Constitution Law and Justice Committee had hearings on this, and it came to light. First of all, actually, before that, after it came to light, then the Attorney General said, "Oh, well, we're going to investigate." So who does Gali Barav Miara get to investigate? And of course, they're the ones who have to be investigated. They had Amit Merari, the lawyer who oversaw the illegal use of the spyware, investigate the use of the spyware. So she was investigating herself and the police whom she oversaw. And I bet you won't believe it, but the Merari report came out. It was complete whitewash. I know, shocking, right? She said there was only 4 times that the Pegasus had accidentally been used, and they didn't understand what it was about. And gosh, what a mistake. But there's no reason to open criminal probes against anybody because it was all done in good faith. And then Moshe Tamam, the head of the Investigations Authority, I think he spoke before the Knesset, said, well, actually, oops, we used it 1,800 times. Now, to be clear, like the 1,800 times is 1,800 apparently specific people, and then from them you get into the communications of everybody that they're in communications with. And so, by some estimates, that means that they were actually spying on about 1 million people in Israel. And this isn't obviously all the Netanyahu probes, but a lot of it is the political use, the weaponization of the legal system against political foes, specifically Netanyahu and his advisors. So this is very important. And what the Commission of Inquiry is really going to do is investigate the investigators, not only of Netanyahu, but of a lot of other cases and operations by the police, by the Attorney General, by the state prosecution, that they have no legal basis for, where they're using weapons of counterterrorism against law-abiding citizens of Israel. So what's very funny, of course, is that all of the champions of so-called democracy, the Yossi Klein Halevi, Danny Gordis, Mati Friedman crowd, but speaking in Hebrew, they all oppose the Commission of Inquiry because it's going to let their cat out of the bag. It's going to give up the game. You're going to see that really a lot of what we're seeing today on the streets and this call, to save liberal Israel. How can you say you want to save Israel the liberal Israel when you're siding with people who conducted such breaches of the basic civil rights and rights to privacy of law-abiding citizens. You can't. I mean, this is a fundamentally illiberal, dictatorial position that it's okay to seize all of the private communications of somebody who hasn't been accused of any crime, who's not a threat to the safety and national security of your country or your society in any way, shape, or form. But you're doing this in order to advance a prosecution of the sitting prime minister of Israel, among other things. So the minute that it became a real prospect that they were going to put together this commission of inquiry, which they're lawfully, permitted, obviously, to do. This was completely legal. So you had Gali Baharav-Miar, again, the Attorney General who appointed Merari to have this whitewash committee of her own work. So she writes this letter saying it's illegal. Why? Because there are reasons. There are reasons. It's illegal. And then they said, no, you're in a conflict of interest. She said that the government has a conflict of interest because of Netanyahu's trial. Netanyahu recused himself from the government vote. He wasn't there the entire time it was under discussion. Neither were his senior aides. They all recused themselves from the cabinet meeting on Sunday. Doesn't matter. And so Gali Baharav-Miar writes this other letter saying, reasons, bad, can't do it. And, she's going to challenge it, obviously, in the Supreme Court, which also has a reason not to want any of this to come out because it's all their friends. So you have this commission of inquiry that was passed, that was approved on Sunday, and Gali Baharav-Miar and the media and all of the people screaming democracy and all of Baharav-Miar's associates are all screaming bloody murder. This is absolutely impossible. And by the way, and this brings us to the last point about this, Merari, Channel 14 reported yesterday, has spoken to 2 top attorneys in Israel and asked them to represent her in front of this committee. So she clearly is afraid that a lot of activities that she did and that she tried to whitewash with her baloney committee are going to come to light, and she's going to be in legal jeopardy, and she should be concerned about that, and so should all of these police investigators, because they used a counterterrorist tool against law-abiding citizens in order to try to frame them for crimes that they didn't commit. So that's pretty amazing, right? And so I think what we're seeing here, again, this is just another instance of it. We've seen it all throughout this time, that their opposition to the governmental commission of inquiry into the illegal use of the Pegasus spy tool against Israeli citizens really sort of exposes the whole lie that they care about any sort of value, right? I mean, a long time ago, a long time ago in today's world, it was a few months ago, a colleague of mine who's much more clued into what's happening in the police, he's also a journalist, and he's much more in tune with them. And he said, and to the left, he said to me, look, Caroline, what's really behind a lot of these protests is that if they actually reform the Attorney General, the state prosecutions, institutions, then a lot of this stuff, a lot of crimes are going to come to light. A lot of things that people have done that are totally corrupt are going to be exposed, and they're going to be in legal jeopardy. So a lot of this is about that. And here I just want to add 2 little tiny things. So one is our friend Ehud Barak. I wrote, I think in June, and you should look it up, as an important piece about how Ehud Barak colluded with the Biden administration, apparently, to destroy Israel's offensive cybersecurity capabilities and our firms. And one of the things that he did was, so NSO is the Israeli firm that developed Pegasus. So it's being used, improperly abused by the Israeli police, but it had been used very positively by the IDF, by the Shin Bet, by the Mossad to prevent terrorist attacks against Israelis and many, many others around the world, sometimes in real time. So it's a very effective counterterrorism tool, which is why it should never be used against innocent civilians. And Israel became a world power in offensive cybersecurity, 8 years ago or so. And And so, as I reported, the Americans around 2020, the Biden administration decided that they wanted to destroy Israel's independent cybersecurity capabilities. They put NSO and another Israeli firm called Caldera on their blacklist. And in the meantime, lo and behold, Ehud Barak, one of, Generalissimo himself, who's leading this war against the government and calling for civil war and blood and everything like that. So he and Jeffrey Epstein's best friend, who met with him 30 times between 2013 and 2017 after he was already a convicted child sex offender. Anyway, so Ehud Barak formed his own cybersecurity firm called Paragon, and they developed a cybersecurity tool competitor with the ones that the other Israeli firms had put together, called Graphite. And what he did was he went to these former Obama officials who had started this consultation firm in Washington, D.C. called West Exec. And he said, look, we don't want to get on the wrong side of the United States. Why don't you tell us what to do when we're forming a Paragon so that we can work together? What are the names of the countries that we can work with? Who can we work with? Who do you not want us to work with? So the idea here was, whereas NSO and other Israeli firms sold the products with export licenses from the Ministry of Defense and sort of being directed by the Prime Minister's office because they were Israeli companies, what Barak did was he developed this firm along with a guy named Ehud Schneerson, who was the head of Israel's Unit 8200, which is in charge of our cybersecurity and the IDF, and they wanted to make it into an American firm. And in the meantime, the Americans, after they blacklisted the Israeli firms, they were trying to Americanize them and force them to move everything to the United States. So they're basically stealing Israel's cybersecurity industry away from Israel. Anyway, so because NSO is falling apart or has fallen apart, and the police can't work with them anymore, now they want to sign a deal with Paragon. Now, I think since it's not an Israeli firm, it's an American-directed firm, that maybe that wouldn't be a good idea. But be that as it may, what does Barak say? Barak said, it was reported last week, that he won't sign a deal with the police so long as there's this commission of inquiry hanging over everybody's heads. Unless the commission is canceled, he's not going to work with the police. So he's so scared, right, of being exposed that he's willing to turn his back on, presumably a multi-million dollar deal with the Israel police to supply them with Graphite, his cybersecurity tool. So this is all very corrupt seeming on the surface. Obviously, all of this stuff has to be investigated, which is why this commission is so important, and it's also why everybody is falling apart over it. In the Attorney General's office, in the police, they're saying that everybody in the cybersecurity unit there wants to resign. Why? Because they're afraid of being prosecuted for their breach of the basic civil rights of everybody from the Prime Minister of Israel down. So, I mean, this is a big deal. As somebody said, Attorney David Ford said on Channel 14 a couple of days ago, he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, the reasonableness clause that the Knesset passed that limits a little tiny bit the Supreme Court's ability to use extra legal means to cancel lawful government policies and laws passed by the Knesset. So on the scale of 1 to 10, from the elite's perspective, that's a 1 on the threat scale. So the Commission of Inquiry into Pegasus, the spyware that NSO produced, is an 8. Like, they're really scared of this. So this is, we're over the target and just have to move forward with that. There's a lot more to say on all of these issues, including the fact that the Supreme Court wants to oust Netanyahu apparently from power at the end of next month by saying that he'll be disqualified from serving as prime minister because he's been dealing with judicial reform at a time when he's a defendant in a criminal case. These are things that, I'll go into later, but we have a lot of stuff going on. But I think that whether we look at the way that the left in Israel has become the leader, has taken on the leadership of the BDS movement against Israel through slandering Israeli government ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir, calling for their isolation, like, you have the triumvirate over at the Times of Israel doing, or whether it's with just purveying these blood libels against Jews who were attacked by terrorist mobs and calling the Jewish victims terrorists. This is a concerted effort by the Israeli left because, maybe they don't like the government, maybe they don't like Zionism, maybe they don't like Jews. That's what we're seeing a lot of that these days, of attacking ultra-Orthodox Jews. We had these anti-Semitic attacks on ultra-Orthodox Jews over the past couple of weeks. We had on a bus in Bnei Brak. You're not allowed to, ultra-Orthodox Jews aren't allowed to hear women singing, men. So these women in this Brothers in Arms, one of the, crazy left-wing organizations, has been the shock troops in all of these anti-government protests. They get on this bus in Bnei Brak and they start screaming in the ears of these really, really, really ultra-Orthodox guys. And this is pure harassment. This is pure anti-Semitism. And you see these guys just shrunk over with their hands over their heads, trying not to listen and trying to figure out how to get off the bus as quickly as possible. That's pure anti-Semitism. And then you had this group of women who went on a march inside of Bnei Brak last week and was all just saying, we hate ultra-Orthodox Jews. And this one woman pulled up her shirt in front of the face of an ultra-Orthodox Jew. So that's not sexual harassment. It's pure sexual harassment. Anyway, so that's what they're doing. Maybe, a lot of them don't like Jews at all. They're like religious Jews, just normal ones. They don't like ultra-Orthodox Jews. They don't like Sephardic Jews. And so that's also part of it. But the sum total of it is that we have now the BDS movement is being led by Israelis. I have some strategic analysis to give you. I'm not going to do too much this week, but I'll just give you one last thing, which is that the big story yesterday was that it was just revealed that Israeli security agency, the Shin Bet, interdicted along the border with Jordan, very, very advanced Klibagor mines that were being smuggled from Iran into Judea and Samaria. So this was a massive upgrade, and I don't know what we caught. I know what we caught. I don't know what we didn't catch. But you see that Iran is moving in full force into the Palestinian arena in Judea and Samaria, and things in Lebanon are bad, and they remain bad and threatening. So all of this stuff is also going on. We have to keep our eyes on this. But I'm going to just leave it at that for this week, and we'll talk more again next week. And we'll have the whole redesign of the Caroline Glick Show. It's going to be really cool and great. And I hope you'll join us. And in the meantime, nice mug, huh? See you next week.